Just looking over in the participants column, I see at least 3 states already represented. So
Yes.
Lots of Oklahomans, but lots of folks from other places. So it's a national event. Can we get someone from outside the U.S.?
We may. We've had them before. We've had them before. We've got some folks that join us sometimes from Canada and from the UK. So if you're joining us from one of those places, welcome. My name is Pat Cawiezell. I am the buyer and author program coordinator at Magic City Books in beautiful downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I want to thank you all for spending a little bit of your Monday evening with us tonight. We are really excited to bring author programs to our community of readers every Monday, every Thursday, usually once more during the week, often on Tuesdays or Wednesdays. We've been doing between 2 and 4 virtual author programs every week since April, with very few exceptions in there. We've presented over 100 of these now. A lot of them are on our YouTube channel. So go to YouTube and just search Magic City Books and see some of our past author programs. If this is your first time joining us, go to magiccitybooks.com and see some of our upcoming programs if you'd like to see more of this kind of programming. We talk to different authors about their books, like I said, 2 or 3 times a week. And so it's a nice way to be able to break from the daily routines and be able to kind of have an experience similar to what we once had when we were all able to gather together. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, it was the summer of 2019 at a time that was different from all of today's times. Brad Lyons joined us here in Tulsa for a in-person event to celebrate the first book that Brad and Bruce worked on together, which was called America's Holy Ground. And in that book, they looked at all 61 of the national parks and wrote about them and about faithful reflections. And we had just one of our best summer events of 2019. It was so much fun to be there and participate in that event and learn more about the national parks. I learned an awful lot at that program, actually, about where all of them are and stuff. And so this book, the one that we're here to celebrate tonight, is called America's Sacred Sites: 50 Faithful Reflections on Our National Monuments and Historic Landmarks. And this book goes state by state to talk about, these beautiful and wonderful sacred spots within our country, both natural and man-made. And we're going to get into all of that in just a little bit. If you have questions for Brad and Bruce, please post them in the Q&A. That is, if you're joining us on a desktop computer, there's a menu bar down at the bottom, or a laptop computer, I guess, and you can post your questions in there. If you're joining us from your phone, there's a menu that you can be able to do it that way as well if you're on an iPad or a phone. But post your questions there in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Also, in the chat, there's going to be links to purchase the book. And if you don't want to break away during the event tonight, you can also go to magiccitybooks.com at the conclusion and be able to purchase a copy of America's Sacred Sites through the website. Well, I want to now take a moment and welcome our 2 authors for the evening, the co-authors of, again, this great book, America's Sacred Sites. A little lower. Bruce Barkhauer and Brad Lyons. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Pat.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank
Good to
you.
be here.
Thank you for having us. We're delighted to be with you tonight.
I want to throw out one quick note about that event that we did in the summer of 2019. And it was that we sold so many books at that event that for one shining week, America's Holy Ground was the best-selling fiction book in the state of Oklahoma. And so that's going to allow me to go back to my high school reunion. And I'm going to strut the heck out of that accomplishment. I'm grateful that that Magic City was able to do that for us, and that we lucked into that. So that I have it framed downstairs. That clipping from the newspaper. So thank you.
That's good. That's good. Well, and if everyone joining us tonight picks up a copy of America's Sacred Sites, we can have a repeat performance. So. So yes. So I wanted to start just by, obviously the success and how much fun that first book was it's to me, just as a bookseller and a book reader, it's a no-brainer that you guys would come back to this. But how did you decide on, kind of moving toward 50 faithful reflections on the on the national monuments and historic landmarks, and why the decision to do, one in each state?
Go for it, Bruce.
Well, Brad's favorite question that he would refer to when we wrote the first book was, people would say, "Where's Mount Rushmore?" Which is not a national park, but it is a part of the National Park Service, and the areas in the country which there are 421 of them, that the National Park Service stewards and is a caretaker for, has a relationship with. And while there were only 61 national parks at the time the book was published, now there are 62, all of the rest of these fall into 63, that's right, because they've now added West Virginia to White Sands and West Virginia. So yes, that's right. Thank you, Brad. 63 now. So that left out a bunch of familiar places to people. Favorite place of Brad's, Devil's Tower, Wyoming, for example, which is a more natural kind of landmark, or in the very thing I started with was Mount Rushmore, which is a very familiar place, which is a man-made national monument. There are scenic rivers and byways that are also a part of the National Park Service, and houses and places where something took place that we decided as a country we needed to mark and preserve. It may have been something wonderful, like the signing of the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia, or it may have been a place where the nation faced a difficulty in a moment of a sort of crossroads and a shifting in American thinking, such as the Edmund Pettus Bridge that's a part of the civil rights walk that you can take that goes from Selma to Montgomery, that is administered by the Park Service and has plaques along the way marking different events, including some deaths that took place during that march. So that was kind of the reasoning. And then the 50 number came up because, well, in the national park system, a lot of the parks are in the West. There are these huge tracts of land. And when you get to Massachusetts, you don't, we found out even with national monuments and sacred sites, so to speak, there weren't a lot of places to choose from, but every state had something. And I pick on Massachusetts because that was the place we chose there was Frederick Law Olmsted's design studio, from where hundreds of cities in the United States were influenced with a beautiful place, with a particular understanding of what a park space could do to bring together rich, poor, young, old, Gentile, Jew, etc. This was part of Olmsted's great view. So that's kind of how all of this came together. Now, Brad, you're the publisher. You have other ideas as to why we did this.
Right. Well, so in addition to, actually, this book is in addition to my daily work, which is as the publisher at Chalice Press, which did put this out. There is a conflict of interest, so it's not like I just vanity pressed it. But when we did America's Holy Ground, we recognized all those spaces that Bruce just mentioned, and we recognized that so many people will automatically pick up a book and flip to their home state, and they want to see, oh, did they pick? Okay, so let's go with Oklahoma. Did they pick the Oklahoma City National Memorial? Did they pick Chickasaw National Recreation Area? What did they pick? Fort Smith, lagging over just a little bit from Arkansas. So we knew people were instinctively going to go look for the state they were in or their home state and see what familiar place they could find in this book. And so we recognized that if we could get one in every state, that was a good way to do it. And we were really lucky that Delaware, got a national park, because it was the last state to have a National Park Service unit. And that's not all that old. It's just 2016, I think. So I don't know what we were going to do about Delaware if they hadn't done that. But we realized that there was that we had enough people who were really having fun with Holy Ground that sacred sites would be a good addition to the line. So off we went.
Yeah. Well, and there, like you said, there are some states that either because they didn't have a National Park Service branch there or something like that, or just because of their smaller size or their more sparsely populated or whatever it was. But then there are states where there was, my guess, far, far, far too many to really be able to choose from. I mean, you could have gone a lot of different directions in New York or in Pennsylvania or in Texas or in California.
Yeah.
And there's just, everywhere you turn around. I lived in Philadelphia for a year and a half. Everywhere you turn around, there's history.
Yeah.
And so, and to choose something in Philadelphia means not choosing something like Gettysburg, which, and at the same time, you're putting together kind of a puzzle of all kinds of things. So what was that decision like? What was the hardest place for you to cut in the book?
Oh, good question. Bruce, does one stand out to you?
Well, Pennsylvania is a great example where we had far-flung places to choose from across the state, including the site of the airliner that went down on 9/11 that was destined for the White House or the Capitol and did not get there. And as you say, there was a host of places on the east side of the state, but Declaration of Independence, Independence Hall, and the Liberty Bell, and specifically the Liberty Bell, kind of became my editorial choice for that state because there was a unique history behind the Liberty Bell that lots of folks don't know. We always associate it with 1776, when in reality it's later that the bell is begun to be used as an image, and it's not for independence at all, at least not for national independence. And we might get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, my hard cut was actually California. Golden Gate National Rec Area is the most visited national rec area in the country. 7 million people, I think, every year. Actually, maybe be more than that. But the great thing about this book is that just because the book is done doesn't mean you have to quit writing. So on the website, there is an entry for Manzanar National Historic Site, which is a Japanese American internment camp in the southern part of the state. And so I've added a few. Bruce is going to add a few here as we continue working through the winter. And so when a new national park is formed, for instance, we had White Sands available on our website, and New River Gorge National Park in West Virginia is going to be added soon. So we were able to add the new ones and keep the original book up to date, but we can add these other ones along behind them. And so it's one of those things of finding the inspiration, doing the research, and finding the time to write it. One of the things I've been doing this fall, I guess going even back into the summertime, we've hit 120 something national parks between our books, the 2 books, and what's on the website. I want to know about the rest. And so I would like to think I do it every day. I don't. I don't get around to it every day, but I'm researching a different national park site every day and writing up a few words about it and posting it on the Facebook feed for America's Holy Ground and Sacred Sites, and getting a photo from each one. So it's just a little 15, 20-minute break where I get to go learn about someplace maybe I've been there and maybe I've never heard of it. Most of them I've never heard of. So my goal is that by the end of the year, and I think I can get it done by the end of the year, I will have written about them all. And there's such an incredible diversity between the historic places and the natural places that the Park Service protects. And it seems like the Mississippi River, 8 miles from where I'm sitting, is the dividing line between the historic in the east and the natural in the west. And it's interesting just to see how that dichotomy plays out.
That's something that I wanted to touch on tonight, which is just how many different places in the country, both big and small. National parks, I think that for a lot of people, national parks kind of start with Yellowstone, and then from there, where do we? Maybe I could name a couple more, but I don't know. And the National Historical Sites, Independence Hall and Liberty Bell, if it's on the back of money, maybe I know what it is, some of those things. But there are these places, and not only are they there, but there are people around them and that know that history and are as well. And it's so much fun. I'm sure while you can do a lot of research, thanks to the internet and the local library and your own personal collections, when you've been able to go and visit these places, and both of you have photo credits in this book of places that you went and visited and included in the book. Tell me about what that experience is like for you when you're visiting these places.
Well, I've been privileged to do everything from the East Coast and Independence Hall all the way to Hawaii and the Arizona Memorial. And over the course of my life, these have been places that have always been of interest to me. So, and I had a family where history was really important. So we stopped to read roadside plaques when we traveled and did that kind of thing. So having been to some of these sites really makes a difference, whether it's something close to me like Lincoln Boyhood Home in Indiana, where he was raised as a young teenager into adulthood, or whether it's having stood over the battleship Arizona in Pearl Harbor. Those are very moving places for different reasons. And I write about in the Arizona Memorial the difference between quiet and silence, because that was my experience there. And on Christmas Eve, we don't sing Quiet Night, Holy Night. We sing Silent Night, Holy Night, and there's a difference. And my experience of visiting Pearl Harbor Memorial was one of silence. It's a graveyard, first of all, but it's an interesting mix, because when I went many years ago, it was also filled with Japanese tourists who were there, and they were also reverent and quiet on that spot, and there was an acknowledgement without saying any words there about an experience that our country shared. And I think a resoluteness that we don't want to go back to this. That was all a part of being in the space. So yeah, is that kind of getting, I hope, at what you're talking about? That I want to be sure that I'm answering the question the way you intended to ask it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I would sit in church and I would read history books. They're little 30-page history books that my mom and dad, who were on the call tonight, hi mom, hi dad, would order me, and I would be overjoyed when they came in. And so while the sermon was going on, I was reading about Pearl Harbor. And so I can share that same experience that Bruce has of being in Pearl Harbor and looking down on the Arizona. I was there with my daughter, who was, I think, 6 at the time, who wanted to know why there were rainbows in the water. And I had to explain that that's oil leaking from the ship. I'm trying to think of a time when I've been to a national park site before and after I wrote the book. And I haven't had a chance to repeat very many since then. But writing the book, both books, has colored the way I view those experiences now. And it's a so much better experience than I've had in the past. So Shelley has asked in the Q&A, how many of these sites have you visited in person? And that the answer is not enough. I've been to about half the national parks. Bruce, I think you were about the same number. I can't even track how many national monuments and historic sites I've been to, dozens and dozens. Of the ones in the book, I've been to probably about a third of them, some of which I wrote and some of which I didn't. I'm always looking to pick these up. So the Missouri one, for instance, is George Washington Carver National Monument, which is like 6 miles off of Interstate 44 between St. Louis and Tulsa. And I have driven St. Louis to Tulsa and to Oklahoma City literally hundreds of times. I'm willing to bet 700 times. And it was only in the preparation of this book that I finally said, I probably ought to stop and look at George Washington Carver National Monument. It's a great site. It's small, but beautiful. It's a great little nature walk. You learn a lot about an American that you probably don't know a whole lot about. You learn about science and how this strange little peanut has changed the world. And you get a glimpse in at a genius mind at a very young age. An age that was a young man who was moving out of slavery and into a world where Blacks were trying to establish themselves in the American culture, and how it was hard for him to find any place where he could establish those roots because of the color of his skin. And so it was a very rich site just to walk around on a Sunday afternoon. And I was lucky also that I happened to time it with the National Park Service's commemoration of the 400th anniversary of the landing of the first slave ship near a national park in Virginia. And I walked into the visitor center, and the park ranger was watching that on a live stream. And that was chilling to put those pieces together on a hot summer afternoon, as my heart was still coming down after having seen a really big snake out on the lawn. That's the one thing. If you look through the books, you don't see any pictures of snakes. That's the one thing Bruce and I agree on.
So while the book is structured with the, state by state, and it's certainly possible to look at it straight through or bounce around and the states that you grew up in, the state that you live in now, the state that you want to visit the most, the state where your family used to live, or whatever it may be. It's also, there's themes throughout the book as well. And one way of approaching the book is to just kind of be looking at it from a thematic standpoint and really be focused on it that way. And there's a lot of really great ones in there. Did those themes, were they there, or did the sites kind of lead to the themes, or did the themes lead to the sites, or were they put together kind of at the same time?
I'd say about half and half, actually. Some of them seemed pretty intuitive, and some of them we had to wrestle with them. One of the things that each of these entries has is it has scripture that goes along with it, and so my MO when I was writing one, and Bruce, you have a different MO on this than I do. I would do the research on the site and then see what spoke to me. And see, okay, I like that element, and I like that element, and I like that element. And on my better days, I was able to mull over, what's that like? What is that? How does that tie in? And then I was able to dig into scripture and find what I was hoping was a good match. And so we've got those 50 passages from the Old Testament and the New Testament in the book, and that's how I connected them. Sometimes the scripture was the first thing I wrote. Sometimes it was the last thing. Different interpretations of scripture fit things different ways. And so BibleGateway.com, not a website I ever thought I would have bookmarked, but really, really useful as I was trying to pull the themes together and extract them from what I was learning about these parks. Bruce, how about you?
Well, I have the advantage or disadvantage of being theologically trained. There's a reverend in front of my name, and so some of the biblical material is sort of ingrained in me in various different ways. But it was more a theological progress for me in terms of making these choices. What in the place spoke to me where my faith intersected my living? What spoke to me in that place that either motivated me in a way to express my faith, or to question certain things that I may have believed, or values that I thought I had that maybe don't square up when you look at the larger history and the piece around it. There's civil religion that's a part of our country. And that's different from what I would call faith expression, community-based religion that's expressed either in Christianity or Judaism or in the Muslim faith, et cetera, that they're different. Christian nationalism is different, that civic faith, and then ways you can go from there are different from these things that come intrinsically from our encounter with the biblical material and its witness. So for me, some of these places were very challenging, and places where we lift up, for example, the Statue of Liberty, and we lift up this virtue of freedom, and yet most of us probably don't realize that one of the key elements in the Statue of Liberty that is somewhat cloaked underneath her robes is a broken chain. And it's the gift of Lady Liberty had as much to do with the abolition of slavery as it did with the celebration of this as a free country, which for a large part of our population wasn't free for a really long time, and some would argue still isn't. And so there's that intersection of challenge of how do we live to our values and our ideals, and how does our faith speak to that, and how does the faith tell us where we have not yet arrived where we want to be. And these places, they have an interesting way of calling these conversations out in us if we give them space, if we give the place itself and its history space to talk to us.
We do have folks joining us tonight over on Facebook, and so we have a question from over there from David that he would like to know. Has any park ever been removed from the National Park Service? Have there been? Brad is going to be on mute, though.
You're muted there, Brad.
I thought I had gotten that out of the way in pregame. I found a listing online of at least 10 of them not long ago, but you Oklahomans who might remember Platte National Park down by Sulphur. Platte was one of the first national parks, and back in the late 70s, it was renamed to Chickasaw National Recreation Area. So there's about 10 of them. Mackinac Island between the peninsulas of Michigan is another one. Those are the two that come to mind because I've been to both of them. Yeah.
Mackinac Island is the no cars are on the island, right?
That's right. That's
yeah.
right. Horses and fudge.
Right. Right. And so if you have a question tonight for Brad or for Bruce, please post them in the comments, or if you're joining us over on Facebook, post them over there, and I'll try and get to as many of them as I can. I wanted to talk also about, we've talked a lot about kind of the since 1776 almost, or since the colonial time in America, but there are many of these sites and places that are included in the book that predate Europeans being on this continent, or in a significant way. And one of those is in my home state of Iowa, the effigy mounds. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, your book doesn't forget about people being here prior to the 1600s or 1492, and that you incorporate, the long history of this continent.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that. That was one of the decisions that Bruce and I made early on in preparation for the first book, was that to acknowledge what America is, you have to acknowledge what America has been, and it hasn't always been. We included effigy mounds in Iowa and Bandelier National Monument in New Mexico and Tuzagut in Arizona and several others. I'm trying to remember which one's the oldest, and whether it might be Devil's Tower in Wyoming, which has a whole unique Native American reverence to it as a holy ground for many tribes of the Northern Plains. Ice Age Floods National Trail is one that's being developed right now, but there used to be a huge lake in the Montana Rockies, and the dam broke and it scoured Washington and Oregon and Idaho. And you drive through there and you can still see the evidence of that. But so there's natural forces at work, but also non-Anglo forces people who have been here for thousands of years, and we want to make sure that we include that because that's part of the history. I got to go to Bandelier in October for the second time, and it was a holier experience this time around, and not just because it was October with the aspen, but because I had a better understanding of it having written this book. So that goes back to the earlier question of when have I visited a park before and after? Mm-hmm. And to climb into the room that's pictured in the book was darn near a holy experience. I did not want to come out of there. But yeah, we recognize those opportunities, those sites, and there's so many of them, and they're all over the place. I debated whether or not to write about one down in Louisiana, but I went with New Orleans jazz instead, and I stand by my call. But I do appreciate those sites as well, especially having grown up in Oklahoma and aware of the Native influences around us. And so much about the Native American experience, I still am learning today, all these years later. So I'm glad that we're able to address that.
And one of the things we discovered, at least I did, and I think Brad had a similar experience, is when doing the historical research around these ancient sites, and I did Newark earthworks, which is similar to effigy mounds. It's similar earth mound building peoples. That there was an extensive trade network that reached from Florida out across the Mississippi River and out the Missouri. And it's archaeologically preserved in these mounds. In Tuzigoot, we found the same kind of thing, that from deep in Mexico and north into what's now Wyoming, that the archaeology says, from the discovery of the artifacts there, that these folks were much more sophisticated than we often give them credit for. And the trading networks they had developed and how they leverage those relationships, really pretty fascinating. It was important to us. It was important to us to acknowledge that the earth is old. And that science is not the antithesis of faith, but comes alongside and informs faith. And they're not meant to be competing ideas or values.
We have another question from Facebook. An old friend of mine, Jennifer, thanks you both for writing this important tribute. America's national parks truly are America's best idea. And she grew up as a Park Service brat and lived in 10 of our most glorious parks and some of our lesser ones too, she says. And she can assure you that spiritual moments exist aplenty in these sacred areas that deserve our reverence and protection.
Indeed.
We would agree. Yeah. And what a neat growing up. I would love to have a conversation with you about that. That's awesome, Jennifer.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about, the sacredness of these places, and they really, as part of the National Park Service, these are places that belong to us all, to everyone, and they do have that sacredness to them, and it's important to protect them. And they protect history, and they protect our natural wonders, but also they've been monuments to not always our best moments. And you talked a little bit about Alabama and the walk and the Edmund Petty Bridge and that sort of thing. But there are many others of these, especially in the East, as Brad said, that there, a lot of this has to do with, memorializing history on the east side of the country and nature on the west side of the country. But, I know that a lot of the Civil War sites are in there as well. Can you speak just a little bit about kind of the importance of remembering everything in history and not just, the things that maybe make us feel warm and fuzzy inside?
Yeah. These are the times we live in, aren't we? Where we are battling over tearing down Confederate monuments, where we're contemplating how do we reflect the history of our country. I think that the National Park Service has been very intentional about acquiring these lands like battlefields as a way of telling the truth about what we have done over the years. And the American story is one to admire, but it's a cautionary tale because our hands aren't clean. So I having been to several of these battlefields are always weird places to me to visit. They feel haunted. I don't necessarily feel like there are ghosts there, but I have to think about what happened here and why and what was being fought for here. And I want to juxtapose that against the entry that we did for Virginia, which was Appomattox Courthouse, which is where Lee surrendered to Grant and effectively ended the bulk of the Civil War. Not to turn this into a Civil War history lesson here, but Grant was chasing Lee, and Lee was desperate. And basically, Grant could have finished off the Army of Northern Virginia, and it could have been horrific. But on Palm Sunday, 1865, Lee reached out to Grant and accepted terms of surrender, a graceful surrender that allowed the men to take their horses and a gun with them. What could have been a massacre turned into one of the most grace-filled moments in American history. That's an argument we can probably still have these days if that was the right strategic decision. I'm not going to get into that one, but there are people way smarter than me about that. But thinking about how these battlefield moments lead to these moments where you almost expect God to walk in the front door because of the mercy that was shown at that point. Can you tell us one of my favorites? It's an amazing sight to be at, just to feel the power of standing in that room where Lee and Grant met.
And it's a reminder that our history has been redacted somewhat. And what we learned, we didn't always learn the whole story. And so these places reconnect us with that. And call us sometimes into account for that, but also just fill out what we only have sketchy understandings of. If you take the time to really visit the site, which means more than just walk around and read the plaques, which is a part of it, but it's to really do some of the deeper spade work around why this site is preserved as it is, and what are the various forces that took to make it a site that the Park Service says we need to remember what happened here. Some of them are seemingly inconsequential. I did the home of the birthplace of Martin Luther King Jr. It's just a house in Metro Atlanta. It's not terribly spectacular. It's close to the Ebenezer Church where his father, and then where he later became a preacher. But he became such a force and recognized symbol almost of a movement, certainly the most identifiable individual in the movement, that we've said this is a place we need to revisit. What went into making him? And he wasn't the perfect child, and he didn't like to practice the piano, and you learn all of these things about him, but you also learn how the neighborhood shaped him, how the influence of the church shaped him, and had a great deal with who he became. The Abe Lincoln site that is not far from where I live, about 40 or so miles to my west. The Hoosier values, that's, Indiana's the Hoosier state. And Indiana takes pride in being the home of Lincoln in his formative years, and that the values that we like to think of ourselves as possessing as residents of Indiana and this part of the country, and the things that influenced us in the frontier making of this part of the country, and how it made us, mattered. And they played a role in who Lincoln became. That's the pride version from Indiana, and so they're significant for those reasons. And as you learn about Lincoln, he lost his mother to milk fever. There's a path of 9 stones. I think it's 9 now. I've forgotten. It's been a while since we did that entry, that mark significant places. And literally rock has been taken from these places that form Lincoln's life. The memorial itself has 5 panels carved in stone that lift up these various moments of Lincoln's formation. And so much of his story is told there. Now, there's little trivial things like it's the tallest flagpole in the Park Service. You can learn if you really dig. But the site invites you to see not just the Indiana pieces, but all of these pieces that come into making Lincoln the man, and how it is we get to the sheer grace and will of the man. And so that's a part of what goes with this experience.
Yeah. I want to follow up on that a little bit and kind of merge the two. And, National Park Service sites are living history museums. And I think that there's a really, really important one about 100 miles from Magic City Books in the Oklahoma City National Memorial. So as an Oklahoma City native, I was a reporter in Oklahoma City. I heard the explosion, I covered the aftermath. And I followed that monument from its earliest days. And I was actually just back there in September again. And we can think of these places as static classrooms. You go there to learn about that specific event. But I think what we saw not even 3 weeks ago in the nation's capital reminds us that there are still elements of what happened of the nationalist movement that Timothy McVeigh started, symbolized at Oklahoma City, haunts us today. It's not gone. They arrested him an hour after the bombing and executed him a few years later, but that movement still lives on. And so the Oklahoma City National Memorial is a testament to what happens when we're not able to prevent those kinds of events, of the loss that we can occur. And it's a tremendously sad, but a tremendously well done site. And I know that it's a kind of a private partnership with the museum that's down there too, which does an excellent job. And I trust that museum is has a lot of work going on right now, trying to figure out how to tell that story again. But I love the way the National Park Service continues to keep those sites fresh and update them and keep them relevant, even when you don't think that there's anything new to glean from them.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I think has been my experience as I've been going through, museums, and as I mentioned, I living in Philadelphia, where the history surrounds you at all times, and some of those sites, Independence Hall, that was a major place for the city of Philadelphia. I mean, its importance in its own time was known to the people in its time, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, and the first and the Continental Congresses and all the things that were happening in Philadelphia. Philadelphia's importance was there. But then you have a unassuming home in Atlanta, or this site where Abraham Lincoln grew up as a child, a nondescript federal building that was just going about its business, helping people interact with the government and do the things that it needed to do, and then all of a sudden it becomes something much more. And so remembering that, I also wanted to say, I mean, Brad, you'd mentioned earlier about how you'd made the drive between St. Louis and Tulsa or Oklahoma City literally hundreds of times, and you see the sign on the side of the highway for the place, and wanting to make that stop. I mean, sometimes, you can give yourself an excuse every time that you have too much time, or, you'll do it another time. But certainly this time now with COVID has helped us remember that there's not always a ton of time to be able to go and do these things. You never know when you're not going to be able to travel freely for months on end. And so, what are some places that both of you are looking forward to visiting again? I know that it's a little bit easier when you're going to outdoor places and the national park, the parks,
Yeah.
but some of the urban places maybe that are harder to be able to travel to these days.
Oh gosh. So where will I go when this is all said and done? Oh, where to start? I actually accidentally stumbled into Gateway Arch National Park a couple of weeks ago, which is easy to do here in St. Louis if you make a wrong turn. I'm looking forward just to getting back into that museum again, because it's a great little museum. I had hoped, I had a fifth grader right now, and those of you familiar with the National Park Services and their Junior Ranger programs know that kids who graduate from fourth grade get a free National Park pass for that following summer. I had planned to go hit the Southern Colorado and Arizona and Utah parks, and maybe even get out to Joshua Tree. So much for that. But I'm hoping that and they've extended the program this year. But you know what? Also, $85, best entertainment value in the world. that's what I'm hoping to do, is maybe hit those Mesa Verde and, Arches, Bryce, Canyonlands, those parks, Grand Canyon, maybe Joshua Tree. That's a heck of a vacation. That's a lot to cram in, and I think that, my kids will get cranky, but they'll get over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been to the Grand Canyon more than half a dozen times, and I can't wait to go back again, because I see and experience something different every time I'm there.
Mhm.
And in my 3 visits to the North Rim, I've been unable to make the drive out to Point Sublime, which is 26 miles of bad road, for which you need a 4-wheel drive vehicle. And the first time I was there was a fire and I couldn't go. The second time I was there was a fire and I couldn't go. And the third time I was there'd been rain and had washed out the road sufficiently so that I couldn't get even the 4-wheel drive vehicle I had rented out there. So there's going to be another attempt, maybe this year, to get out there and to see this. And I asked one of the rangers who worked with me. I was out there doing some videotaping for another project related to my day job, and and I said, "So tell me, what's the deal about Point Sublime?" He said, "Man, it's just sublime." Because you see, so many of these experiences defy description. Yeah, I think that's a part of the sacredness inside of this whole thing, right? That we can't find words to adequately describe the way in which we're moved. Whether it's the beauty and wonder of the Grand Canyon or Arches, Bryce, all those great places where I've been, and I think Brad's been to most of those. Zion, I mean, they're magnificent. But also in these little small out of the way places where history happened, for better or for worse, and called us into account.
Yep. We have one more question here in the Q&A, and Shelley would like to know, what is the National Park Service process for ensuring the accuracy of the stories that are told at the sites?
Good question. I think it's the same kind of accuracy that goes into doing quality research. So that's going to be the science behind the site, talking to the local residents if there are historical undertones to what's going on, and trying to synthesize what that story really is on a complex location. I know the National Service is really good about, National Park Service is really good about incorporating Native American voices, particularly in Western parks. And they interact with those communities on a very regular basis to ensure that they're having the story told correctly, that they're receptive to new stories, and that they are respecting those lands as best they can, which is hard to do on a site like Yosemite that's almost overrun. But that's about as close as they can, as any of us can get, to trying to make sure that our facts are straight. It's a matter of putting in the work, and the National Park Service has hundreds of experts working on this all the time, and pulling from the best quality sources. So that when I read a National Park Service sign, it's got a very high level of credibility with me.
Yeah, absolutely. The documentation and the research that goes into it, I think, is pretty significant. And if you're lucky at a lot of the sites, the photography you can get from them, because there's somebody there 365 days a year who sees it in all the light and all the dark, in all the colors of spring, fall, summer, and winter. Pretty amazing. And we need to put in a plug for the preservation of these places. That yes, the country has needs related to industry and commerce, and the acquisition of resources, but there's also a part of this that cannot be replicated or replaced. That the damage that can be done from extracting the resources can take away something that really needs to be preserved for our grandchildren and their grandchildren to see and experience. And so I appreciate the Park Service wanting to safeguard these lands and in some places to expand them, where we've realized there are Native American burial grounds. There's archaeological value to a site or geologic value to a site that beyond its beauty needs to be preserved for education, for posterity, for enjoyment. The recreation areas do that, and they're managed well. You can't, I think of the recreation area around Hoover Dam, and it's busy, but it's managed well to try and strike that balance between everybody in Nevada and Arizona and the corners of those two states where they join, wanting to be on that water and be in that place and hike those grounds, and the need to have them open, and yet so they don't get overrun, so that they are preserved and that balance is struck. The Park Service does a remarkable job with that, to keep it accessible and yet protected.
Right.
It's a delicate balance to strike.
Indeed. Yes. Well, this is just something that belongs on your shelf, whether you are, going to be taking a bunch of trips in 2021, or whether you're going to be traveling vicariously just from your couch. There's something in here. Each section, gives you a lot to reflect on, gives you some history. And I'd been meaning to talk about this the whole time, just wonderful photography throughout. And I know, Brad, when we did the event, a couple summers ago, you talked about how great the resource is that the National Park Service has, these photographs that are available for us all to be able to see kind of what's out there in these places, even if you can't get there.
Yeah, there's a wonderful law, public domain, and the fact that government photographs are public domain, and the National Park Service, realizing what a gem it's setting on, has a wonderful website that there's a link to in the back of the book in the reference section, and that's basically how I spent the winter of 2018-19. Was pulling photos. Oh, make me go look at hundreds and hundreds of beautiful photos. It's a wonderful, fun thing to do, and that's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed doing that the park a day thing that I've been doing. Is I get to go in there and I look around at those different photos. And so we could not have done this without the photographers who are listed in the back of the book. And there's at least 2 pages of them in Sacred Sites and 3 in Holy Ground. They have the job I want. I want to be Victoria Sutherland, whose name just keeps popping up over and over and over and over.
That's right. And there's so many entry points into the book. Like I said, if you just want to be thinking about the themes and reflecting on those themes, then this is a great way to just kind of be able to look at these natural spaces, these historical sites, and reflect on those themes and that feeling of awe and wonder that you can experience when you go visit these places. And hopefully we'll be able to all do that again soon. I want to thank you both very much for joining us tonight. I had a great time, and I hope those of you that are joining us, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook, or you catch this later on our YouTube channel, I hope that you enjoy it as well. And we'll be back again tomorrow night for an event with another set of authors, Jordan Blaszczyk and Christopher Hoff, who have written a book about, also about America, about a road trip through America. One of them is a Democrat, one is a Republican, how they came together throughout this road trip to find things that we can kind of come together on. And, these parks and the National Park Service is certainly one of those areas that we can all kind of get behind and agree upon. So join us again tomorrow night at 7:00. And Bruce, Brad, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Great to be with you.
Stay safe, everybody.
Good night.